And Corey, you can go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this amazing session that we have with my friend and colleague, awesome coach, leader, innovator, trailblazer, Heather Hubbard. Heather is the CEO and founder and chief storyteller for Simple Courage. Before that, Heather ran, Simple Courage is so embedded in me, I already forgot the last name. But anyway, Heather has been around doing incredible work in the marketplace. First, she was a lawyer, litigator, practice group head at an AmLaw 200 firm. And then she broke out to do something innovative, creating a space where she could help equip and empower women and leaders to be their best selves and accomplish the biggest dreams that you could set. Simple Courage follows in that tradition, and we're excited to have her here today. Please join me in welcoming my friend Heather Hubbard. And I know that Zoom has these reaction things, so feel free to use them to clap or give her a shout out since we're all on mute. Heather, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you so much for having me. Before I begin, I just wanted to share a little bit about the Belonging Project. For those of you, if this is the first time that you are maybe watching one of these webinars or attending, because this is going to be an interactive workshop, by the way, so heads up on that. This is not just going to be me talking at you. The Belonging Project is a national effort to support and build community among diverse law students, attorneys, and their allies to combat the impact of COVID-19 on diversity in the profession. It brings together legal industry partners to provide tools, resources, and programs to support the continuing personal and professional development of diverse talent. It brings the power of Ubuntu, the universal bond we have as a people, and the focus on collective responsibility to the legal community. And I am so honored to be a part of the Belonging Project today with our, I'm not even going to call it a presentation, I'm going to call it a conversation about fear and courage. So Justin, I will let you go ahead and share the slides. And from a user experience, I'm going to give you guys just a few tips. You probably are just professionals at Zoom at this point, but in the top right-hand corner, there's a little button that says View. If you check the side-by-side speaker, it's going to give you a few options. So for me, I have mine centered. It could be that you mostly see the presentation and I'm over to the side. So it really just depends on your preference. If you like to see the slides really big, you can leave it as is. Or you'll notice that there's a little bit of a black bar and a little thing you can grab with your mouse right there in the middle. It's a slider and you can slide it across. So you can make the slides really small and me really big, or you can set it up where it is half and half. I will be sharing a lot that is not in the slides, and the slides are really just a way for us to direct the conversation, but you have control and autonomy in setting that up in the way that you would like. We are going to be using the chat function, so feel free to use that and ask questions that way. Also, we are going to be using the breakout rooms, so be prepared for that. I would suggest that you go ahead and turn on your videos. I know a lot of you don't have your video on, and I totally get it. Sometimes when you're in Zoom rooms all day long, it can be really tiring. But when we go in the breakout rooms, we're going to be having conversations that might not be typical. They might be a little bit vulnerable. And sometimes when we go in those rooms and we're engaging with someone that is just a name and not an actual face, it's hard to build that trust and that vulnerability. So I like to say that when we participate in breakout rooms this way and we turn our videos on where we can truly see each other, it's a low stakes way to train your body and your mind that it is okay to get a little bit uncomfortable and show up in a way that may not be typical. So that would be my invitation for you today. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get everybody warmed up. I'm curious that we're going to use the chat. Thank you for saying that. Corey. In the chat, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being very little and 10 being a lot, how many of you have experienced change in the last 12 months? Where do you think you fall on that scale? 1 being a little, 10 being a lot. How much change? 5, 10, 6, 8, 15. Yes. Yes. Okay. I'm not sure I've seen any under a 5. Right. Okay. So, I mean, it was a bit of a trick question, but it's difficult to say that we've not experienced some kind of change personally or professionally in our lives in the past 12 months. All right. Next question. Of that change, personally and professionally, and I'm talking, this is a generalization. I know that attorneys like to really they like to just parse it all out, but we're just going to do a generalization. With 1 being negative, right? Really bad. And 10 being like amazing. I'm curious, of the change you're experiencing, how much of it feels negative and how much of it feels positive? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how does that feel for you? How does the change feel for you? Yeah. Okay, we've got some positive, we've got some in the middle. Some too. Thank you for saying that, Corey, because I find that oftentimes when we come into these rooms, especially attorneys, when I speak to rooms where it's not all attorneys, it's often a different conversation. I feel as though with attorneys, we have been trained. It's a cultural issue professionally that we are, although we're critical and judgmental, we try not to admit either weaknesses, something we perceive as a weakness, or we don't want to share that things aren't going well, right? Like we think that's not allowed. So to the extent that your answer was actually below a 5, but you just didn't feel comfortable sharing that, just know that that's a whole lot about what we're going to talk about today, the power dynamics of fear and change. Because the fear that often has power over us in showing up and truly being ourselves and being frank and being able to have honest conversations, it's what keeps us where we are. It's what supports the status quo. It's what makes it very difficult to actually affect change in the world, let alone in our individual lives. So that is what we are going to be talking about today. Some change is good. Some change feels bad. A lot of times it's uncertainty. But I think most of us are always wanting to improve and grow, again, individually, collectively, and that is a form of change. And because change brings up a lot of fear, it's important that we talk about those power dynamics. So let's start with the concept of what is courage? What is courage? When you think about courageous people, who do you think about? Like the people that I'm showing, are these the examples of people that you think about when you think of what is courage? And I can't see a lot of you, so you can throw it in the chat box or you can turn the video on and shake your head at me. Oh, Corey, you think of your dad and your mom. I love that. Is that how the rest of you feel? Do you also think of people in your personal lives, or do you tend to think of people who are doing really big things, or more of the almost like macho patriarchal, aggression or defense? We might think of the military or the police. I'm curious. Oh, I love that, Mark. People closer in your community. That's great. That's great. Okay, so we've got a very quiet group. So here's what we're going to do. Justin, we're going to mix this up. We're going to go into a breakout room early because we got to get people engaged and talking, or I promise you, y'all are not going to enjoy this very much. So we're going to have our first moment of courage right now, and I'm going to do this on the fly. Okay, so Justin, we're going to send people into breakout rooms, and let's just give them 4 minutes total. That's plenty of time. Here are the questions that I'm going to ask that I want you to share with your partner. So you're going to go into a breakout room with your partner, and I want you to share, number one, why you're here today. What are you hoping to gain out of today's workshop? Why are you here today? Number two, what resistance, we're not even going to say fear, what resistance might you be feeling about interacting today? And then three, what's your favorite dessert? What's your favorite dessert? So number one, why are you here today? What are you hoping to get out of it? Number two, what resistance might you be feeling towards interacting? And three, what's your favorite dessert? All right, Justin, let's go into breakout rooms.
And height. So.
All right, I see more video faces. I'm just gonna go ahead and tell y'all, if you're still here, you are courageous. You know why? People were dropping like flies when we sent you to breakout rooms. This is what happens. Lawyers, we are a special breed. And I mean that, right? Like with all of my heart, because I too totally get it. I totally get it. I was there. So I just want to share with you, I'm going to keep showing up for those of you who are here to show up. If you are here to stay and to play, I am with you. Okay. So we are going to dig in and we're going to have a lot of fun. Oh, by the way, so I was using this emoji stick in my last pop-up playhouse that we just finished a little bit ago. I like to say I bring the fire. So you probably don't have one of these. I'm sorry, but you can raise your hand. You can give me a thumbs up. So I'm curious, how many of you were able to interact, meet a new friend, maybe meet someone you already, yes, connect with someone, Sean. Yeah, wonderful. Sean was great. Yes. Okay, good. So you were able to connect. And so I'm curious, who wants to share around resistance? Will anyone share around resistance? Because we all have it. I'm happy to share too. Raise your hand if you're willing to be brave enough to share in the moment. Sean will.
Apparently it's my day. I was telling you, Andrea, that it just, because I'm used to being part of your other groups, but I wasn't. This is a different group and it's all attorney, or I presume all attorneys. So that caused me some resistance. And frankly, it was a little weird when I got on and everybody had their screen off because I'm used to your groups where we have to have them on.
Yeah.
It's like, what is going on? This is weird. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you guys this and raise your hand. How many of you feel comfortable for the most part in rooms with other attorneys when it comes to like truly showing up to fully be yourself? Anyone feel 100% comfortable? I love it. Mark and Andrea and Corey, they feel 100% comfortable. I will tell you, I always struggled. I still struggle. I grew up in a really small town in Kentucky, and we didn't know any lawyers. The only lawyers that I knew of was if we like drove into our little town and like it was on Main Street. So when I went to law school, I already felt like I didn't belong there. That like I somehow had like tricked people into letting me in. And because I didn't have money, I didn't feel cultured. I often felt like I was being judged. And that went with me. I remember when I was a summer associate and we were in a big fancy firm. And so I'm up at this like rooftop, it was like a presentation ceremony, get together, cocktail party. And I had never been in a tall building before. And I was embarrassed by that and didn't want to share that because all of these people were wearing these fancy clothes and they seemed to be so cultured. And so I would try to, just pretend that I was being something that I wasn't. And even when I was a partner and a practice group leader and was often like the only woman in a room, I don't know that I ever felt 100% confident or completely myself, because I carried those old stories with me. And I'm not going to project my stuff onto you, but if you do experience that, just know you are not alone. And I do get the sense when I talk to people that sometimes that is a bigger issue for those of us who are first generation lawyers. So that's my experience. All right, so let's talk about everyday courage, because it sounds like some of you, like Corey was already all over it. She was like, when I think about courage, I think of my mom, I think of my dad. And that is often the everyday courage that we show up with. And in many ways, we think that it doesn't really make that big of a difference, or it can't have the same impact as someone who is really in the spotlight, that's getting the awards and the honors, and they're on the cover of a magazine, or they're what society says is courageous. But the truth is, it's our everyday courage. It's those small acts that can truly change professions, including the legal profession, as well as the world. And not just that, but individually in our lives. So let's talk about that. As I shared, there was a time when I felt like I was a complete rock star as a lawyer. Everything was going great, but I had all of this stress in my life. I had a lot of anxiety in my life, and I really wasn't sure what it was at the time. What I learned was it was actually fear. It was fear. It was all fear. Now, I would not have told you at the time that I was fearful, because I thought I was this brave badass and everyone told me that I was. So it never crossed my mind that it was fear. But the truth is, I was paralyzed by fear. I was afraid of disappointing people. I was afraid of saying no. I was afraid of not being good enough. I was afraid of being a fraud and being found out. I was afraid that I would be seen as anything other than a team player. There was so much fear in my life that was driving my life, and I felt so exhausted and resentful and angry and didn't know what it was. But it turns out it was fear. And so it was at that time that I was working through that I was able to conceptualize the concept of fear and courage. By the way, they're mowing outside. There's nothing I can do about that. This is work from homeland. But if you hear that noise, that's what it is. So here's how I was able to visualize it, and it helped me out. And so I'm hoping it might help some of you as well. And that is that there's a quadrant of the types of courage. Now, this one's not a true type of courage. We'll get to it in a minute, but we think of it in this way, so it's important that we talk about it. So the first one is fearlessness. The second is extraordinary courage. The third is false courage. And then last, it's what I've coined, which is simple courage. So let's talk about each and every one. All right, let's start with fearlessness. It's funny, Corey and I were actually chatting yesterday. We've spent all day yesterday and today together. And Corey was saying that it's such a good point. If you truly are fearless in every area of your life, you are a sociopath, okay? We are humans. We all have fears. It is natural. But we all have areas of our life where we are not afraid. And so in that way, we are fearless, but not with everything, okay? So fearless is when you're not afraid. And when you're not afraid, you don't need courage. But the interesting thing is, as a society and as we compare ourselves to each other, we'll look at what others are doing and we're like, oh my gosh, that is so brave. I wish I could be like that. Well, they may not be brave in that situation. They may be fearless. And I guarantee you there are situations where you are brave. Well, you're not afraid, I apologize. You're fearless, but other people say you're brave, right? So give me some examples. You can throw it in the chat. What are some examples of where you are fearless? I'll give you an example. For me, public speaking. I'm pretty fearless when it comes to public speaking. Dance, cooking, what else? What are some ways in which you are fearless? Maybe you're not afraid of heights. Maybe you're fearless as a parent. What are some ways in which you are fearless? Reading, does that count? Why not? Why not? Knowing useless trivia? I love it. Spiritual studies, internal growth. Yeah, so the thing about fear and courage is that it's less about the act and more about the actor. And that can really help with perspective on when to actually show up with courage, okay? So it's less about the act and more about the actor. It's personal, it's subjective. So one of the things that you can do when you are looking at social justice or advocacy or being a better ally is to say, what are areas in which I am fearless? And when you're fearless, like, it doesn't drain your energy. It's like as easy as breathing. So when you think of things that you're like, well, that's not really brave, right? Because I'm just being me. Those are great opportunities for you to really show up and double down to help others and to help lead the cause. All right, let's talk about extraordinary courage. This is the type of courage that most of us actually think about on a day-to-day basis. It's really when you are in a life or death situation or you're facing physical danger. Okay, so you're afraid, but you are often, like, whether it's running into a burning building, saving something, you are in a traumatic event. This is showing up with extraordinary courage. I'm curious, how many of you have ever been in a situation where you were called upon to show up with extraordinary courage? Anyone? Corey has, Mark has. And I'm curious, Mark, will you share? Have you been in several situations or just a few?
Well, I'm a former police officer, so I definitely have been in a few.
There you go. There you go. How about you, Corey? Not many?
Okay, so finally unmuted. Some that I can think of, I remember there was this religious extremist group when I was growing up. They were called the Maitasini, and they actually killed hundreds and hundreds of people throughout northern Nigeria and in the town that I grew up in. And when I was, I think, 10 or 11, there was this belief, and I still don't know if it was ever true, but we believed they were coming onto the university campus and coming to the elementary school. And all the teachers freaked out and told us that we had to stay in our seats and stay in the room. And of course, they tried to close the doors, which, I mean, if these people were really coming, and they had a bad history, the way they killed people was really very violent. Anyway, teacher said we needed to stay in the class, and I left. And my best friend followed me, and I went to my sister's class. And she's 4 years younger than me. And her teacher said I couldn't come in. So I climbed through the window. I was like, I'm going home, and I'm taking my sister because I'm not going home without my sister. Of course, my sister didn't want to leave because I made her leave behind her brand new packet of crayons. That's all she remembers about that day. So it was a childhood experience of, excuse my French, but shit is popping off. And the adults I don't know what the adults are doing, but this doesn't feel safe, so we need to leave. And there were other things like that, but yeah.
Yeah. So with extraordinary courage, it's often a situational issue, right? It's not really the actor. And I don't know about you and Mark or anyone else who's experienced extraordinary courage. It's generally not something you think too much about, right? Like, you just act. You do in the moment what you feel you need to do. One thing I do want to mention is that sometimes it is the actor, but it's from a bias or a prejudice place. So, for example, as a white woman, I probably could stand up to police in a way that a Black person could not. And so what could be simple courage for me might turn into a situation of extraordinary courage for someone else. And so I just think it's important for us to understand that, like all conversations around privilege, when we talk about fear and when we talk about courage, sometimes it's safer for some of us to show up with courage than others. And so I just want to plant that seed in the back of your mind as well. All right, so few of us are called to show up with extraordinary courage unless it's our profession, or we just find ourselves in the situation. But what we show up with more often than that is the false courage and the simple courage. So false courage, I built an entire career in life based on false courage. It is when you are afraid, but you show up with courage in a way that you think that others want you to. For me, that often meant putting on armor. And so it was kind of like I felt like I was going into battle, but I thought that I was being courageous. But instead, what I was really doing was just showing up with the roles and the expectations that others had for me. And it was so that I wouldn't disappoint people. It was so that I could keep my seat at the table. It was so that I was able to maintain what I told myself was professionalism. There was a time when I was in the lawsuit from hell. I don't know that any of us have had, joyful lawsuits, but it was a really, really contentious lawsuit. A lot of money on the line, and we all agreed to continue the case, like discovery. And it was a joint motion, no one opposed it. And our federal judge was about to retire, and he was not going to retire with this case still pending. And so he told us, no, you have to finish your discovery in 30 days. Well, we hadn't even started depositions. It was an antitrust trial. So it was so complex. So we went into, I'm sure you're familiar with it, we just started working around the clock, right? Just around the clock for an entire month. And so I was so exhausted. I was actually living basically out of a hotel in Atlanta. I'm here based in Nashville. And so I'm just down there, I'm getting binders, prepping for the next day. The attorney on the other side was a complete and utter asshole. I know that often happens, but like he literally was the biggest jerk I ever dealt with in my entire legal career. And one night when I'm sitting in my hotel, I got a call from my husband who said that he wanted a divorce. And it pissed me off, but I totally pushed it down because I knew that there was no time for emotions, right? So totally pushed it down. I said to myself, my clients deserve better than this. My clients can't have me having emotions. My partners, my colleagues, they deserve better than this. So I can't have emotions. And I didn't want the jerk smelling, any fear or weakness or anything on me at all. And so I continued to show up each and every day, even though I'm exhausted, even though I'm hurt, even though I have fear of what others will think of me if my husband and I do get a divorce, because I have a belief that for some reason it might make me less worthy. So I armor up and I don't let anyone know. I don't let anyone know. I don't let my family know. I don't let my friends know. I don't let my colleagues know. No one knew for months. And so that was one of the ways that I used to show up with false courage because I thought I was being brave. Another example would be sometimes when I would hear things that were inappropriate, or I would be in a room and comments were made about me or others, I would let it go. Again, I was just armoring up because I didn't want others to think that I couldn't be in the room, right? I thought that's what I had to do to have a seat at the table. And I thought I was being courageous. I now don't see that. I don't think that. But this is what false courage is. We show up how we think others want us to show up, or how we have to show up in order to be accepted in society. So I'm going to get you all to be courageous again, and I'm going to get you to go into some breakout rooms. And I want you to think about, and I want you to share some examples of where you have shown up with false courage in your life, whether it's going on right now, whether it's in the past. Just a few examples of the ways in which maybe you have been showing up in the way that others expect you to, not necessarily how you want to. So Justin, on this, let's do 6 minutes. So you'll each get 3 minutes apiece to share. If you happen to end up in a room with 3 people, you're going to get 2 minutes each to share. We'll do 6 minutes total. Are you meeting? Are you all having good conversations? Are you liking your partners? You have to say yes to that because you're like, they might be able to see me. Yes, they're amazing. Of course, they're amazing. All right, so here's my next question for you, and you can throw this in the chat box, and that is, what were you afraid of? What were you afraid of? Now, I get that you showed up with courage anyway, right? But what were you afraid would happen when you showed up in this way? Regardless of whether it actually happened or not, what were you afraid of? Not meeting expectations, losing friends. Resistance. Self-confidence, reactions, loss of relationship, exclusion, consequences. Yeah. I'm not sure if you're noticing this, but oftentimes our fears for false courage and simple courage are the same, right? The underlying fears are often what others are going to think of us, and whether or not we're going to let down others, or be rejected. So I'm curious whether it was what you shared in the breakouts or just in general, has anyone ever been punished or experienced consequences? Like there were repercussions for you showing up with simple courage? Anyone? Yeah, Andrea, me too. I think most of us have, right? When we show up the way we want to, sometimes there are repercussions. Not always, not always. Sometimes simple courage can be something as small as like, I want to ask for the business and I'm afraid, but it's what I really want to do, so I'm going to do it anyway, right? And then you send the email and you ask for the business and they respond back and they're like, yeah, I'd love to send you some work. And you're like, oh, that was no big deal at all. But sometimes when we show up courageous, doing what we want to do, we might be rejected. They may not respond to us. They might start avoiding us. They might say no. They might complain about you to another partner because you were direct, right? So sometimes there are consequences and repercussions that we experience. It's a very real thing. And it's why, and I just want you to understand that when we choose not to show up with simple courage, it doesn't mean that we are afraid or we're weak. It doesn't mean that we don't have values. It doesn't mean that we don't think highly of ourselves. It's the fact that society is often telling us no. Our professions, our families, our religions might be telling us no. And our bodies are telling us no. So let's talk about this, okay? So when like everything is telling us no and there are repercussions, it's like, well, why the heck would I even want to do that? So for those of you who kind of love to geek out on like neuroscience like I do, this is a really simplistic way to talk about how fear shows up. So when we are afraid, it triggers our amygdala. And our amygdala is our fight or flight response. We have had it forever, okay? And this is what, used to, if there was a bear coming at us, right? We needed to run away from something, this is what it would trigger. But our brain, although we have evolved, our brain doesn't understand that having a difficult conversation it doesn't understand that that's any different than the bear coming at you. And so when our amygdala gets triggered, we get cortisol. We get adrenaline and it goes rushing through our bodies, which is super helpful for extraordinary courage. Super, super helpful because you actually need to take action without thinking, right? This is fight or flight. And the adrenaline is really, really helpful in that situation. And what happens is it then moves through you. So for those of you who've been in a situation like that, you might be a little jittery afterwards. It doesn't last, that long. Now, if there was trauma, that's a different issue, but the actual act, it can release pretty quickly. When we think about simple courage though, right? With simple courage, when I guarantee you that you've had a difficult conversation with someone before, right? Or you were thinking about having a difficult conversation with. If you've ever broken up with anyone or you've quit a job, my guess is, unless you were just like, screw you, I'm out of here, you really struggled with the concept of having the conversation. And you think about having the conversation and you get triggered and you start getting the cortisol and you start getting the adrenaline and your chest tightens. You might start sweating, you get really nervous, and you're like, maybe tomorrow or maybe after lunch, right? Like we just keep putting it off because it's not a life or death situation, which means you don't actually have to act in the moment. So what happens is we'll procrastinate, we'll analyze, we'll talk to friends, we try to get as much feedback as possible, we'll ruminate, and we work ourselves up in a tizzy. And we often, if we're about to take that action or we're thinking about taking that action, we trigger the cortisol and we trigger the adrenaline, but we don't take action. And so it never actually moves through. There's actually a ton of research on this, and it's a whole lot of why we walk around constantly stressed, overextended. Our bodies are often a complete mess because we are literally sending these hormones into our body on a regular basis, but we're not actually taking the action. So it can feel as though it is a life or death situation. And then we just get in this place where we are overwhelmed, exhausted, resentful, frustrated, and angry a lot. So this is one of the reasons why we don't show up with simple courage. And it is the reward mechanism of false courage that makes it easier for us to actually show up in that way, right? That's why we do it. It's not because we don't want to stand in our values or be true to ourselves. It's because we are rewarded and it feels as though there's less at stake. But there's a lot of research that says there's a whole lot at stake. It might not be a physical life and death situation, but it might be of your soul. And here's what I mean by that. I'm not saying that in a religious way. So Bronnie Ware, if any of you have read The Top Regrets of the Dying, Bronnie Ware was a palliative nurse. And for years, she worked with people at the end of their life. And so she was just interviewing them, having casual conversations, asking them about their lives and about their regrets. And she started to notice patterns. And when she started to notice that, then she really started digging in and doing the research. And the number one regret, I'm going to do a bit of a spoiler alert. It's a great book. I encourage you to go get it. But the number one regret of the dying is I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. So in the moment, it may feel easier to show up with false courage. But if we want to get to the place where when we are looking back on our lives and we don't have regrets, we're proud of the life that we lived, it requires us to show up with simple courage. And I'll just go ahead and tell you straight up, most people won't answer that call. Most people won't do that because it just feels easier in the moment to go with the flow, which is what keeps the status quo. And it's what keeps us living good lives. Many of us make great money, right? But it's not always fulfilling. But what would it be like if you could build those courage muscles, stay in a practice where you do start to see the rewards each and every day, and then get to the end of your life without having those regrets? Like that, for me, is what I am aiming for. And I get we're all different, but if you're wanting to do that, there are some tools to help. And the first is creativity, which I know is really hard for lawyers. We don't like to be creative. It's really difficult for us to think outside the box, let alone be what we consider crafty, right? Or playful or fun. But creativity is one of the most powerful tools to teach your body and your brain that it's okay to play. It's okay to, color outside the lines. It's okay to just have fun for the sake of having fun. The second is curiosity. Again, law school teaches us to be critical and judgmental. That does not help us with courage. That's going to make us want to minimize risks all day long. It's going to pull us into false courage each and every day. Some of the mantras that I like to say to try to remind myself to stay in a place of curiosity, because this is not my natural state, is to say, I wonder why that is. Or isn't that interesting? I wonder why. Like, I wonder why I believe that. I wonder why that person believes that. I wonder what would happen if. And it really helps you stay in a place of exploration and truly trying to understand without getting the right answer. It's not about right or wrong. It's just about being open and curious. The third is connection. So many of us try to do this work alone, whether it is with a therapist, that's one other person, that's great. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe you're reading books or doing podcasts. Maybe you're journaling. Maybe you're just trying to be, courageous on your own and you feel alone. It's so much easier to be in a state of courage and to practice it each and every day when you are around others who are doing the same. One, it's going to let you know you're not alone, because a lot of times we make up these stories that it's just us when it's not true at all. And because, as I shared, most people actually don't or won't show up with simple courage, having others who are willing to do the same makes all the difference in the world. The next is reflection. So this is getting really honest, really honest with yourself and others, but mostly with yourself. Learning to have awareness, learning to ask questions. Where did I get that belief? Why do I think that? What am I afraid of? Each and every time you start to feel stressful, or each and every time you start to have anxiety, asking yourself, well, what's causing this? What am I afraid will happen? That can be a huge tool in letting you to see things more neutrally, as opposed to making up stories. And then last is presence. I think I saw Gina on here earlier, Gina Cho. I don't know if she's still on here. But mindfulness was one of the tools that really helped change my life when I was practicing law. But when we start to show up fully present, not just in our minds, but in our bodies, most of us we don't like to stay too connected to our bodies. We don't like to feel emotions. It's easy for us to just shut them off. But when we fully show up in our mind, in our body, in our spirit, it allows us to be more grounded and, again, go back to that place of non-judgment and exploration so that we can be more courageous each and every day. So here's the deal. Simple courage does not have to be this huge, grand gesture. Oftentimes we think that that's what it has to be. You don't have to change everything overnight. You don't have to go take a class. You don't need to do a curriculum. Little bitty steps each and every day can make a huge difference. And it really can lead to big changes. Oftentimes we do things sporadically and that just doesn't add up. It's like anything, right? Like whether you're going to the gym, whether you're working on your goals for work, same is true with courage. If you just show up every single day, a little more courageous than you did the day before, it really does add up. There was a time in my life, I'll just quickly share this. I saw someone post on LinkedIn the other day, someone who's really well connected in the Nashville community, that she just became a member or she's on the board of a bank. And she shared a picture and she said, these are the greatest, most amazing people. I'm so honored to be on this board with them. And they're just such a great reflection of the community. And they were all white. It was like 15 people, 14 white men, and now we got one white woman. And so in the comments, I said, congratulations, they're so lucky to have you. I hope that you will bring diversity to the board and stay committed to that, because surely that community and the bank's customers aren't, I don't know the math, 99% white men. And that, you know, and I don't remember exactly how I said it, but like I said it publicly, and that's true to me. Now, not everyone, you know, some people might want to have private conversations. So I'm not trying to say you have to do certain things, but that's who I am, right? Like if I'm being true to myself, it's calling it out in a public way. Even though I'm being kind, I'm going to call it out in a public way. There was a time in my life when if I did that, I would have been showing up with simple courage. Now I'm fearless. And it was because each and every day, as I tried to get a little bit more outside of my comfort zone, I was able to move through that. And not always are you going to move from simple courage to fearlessness, but sometimes you will. I mean, that's what personal growth is all about. So small shifts can lead to big changes. And I promise you that others seeing my comment, it made them feel a little bit more courageous that they had permission to do the same. So here are my top 3 tips if you're wanting to start practicing a little bit more simple courage. Number 1, keep it simple. Keep it simple, right? Like if this is something that you aren't, you know, practicing on the daily, then don't overcomplicate it. Don't think, okay, I have to now go do all of these things. No, just keep it simple. It can be something really, really small, which is, by the way, my second tip. One thing that I used to do is anytime I had a thought that I wanted to do something, and then I thought, oh, but I can't do that. That would be my moment of saying, okay, this is simple, this is small, let's try it out. And for example, one for me last year, it was like the last in-person event I had, I wore flats up on stage. Now, some of you might do that all the time and it's like normal for you, but for me, I was socially conditioned that to be professional, I have to wear heels on stage. And so I didn't want to wear heels. I wanted to wear flats. But it was in that moment when I'm packing my bag that I was like, I wish I could wear flats. Too bad I can't. And I was like, oh, wait, what is that? And so I packed them. And I still packed the heels because I wasn't sure I wanted to commit. But it really did make me feel fearful. But it was simple and it was small. And I did it and I survived. Right? So those are good examples of simple and small. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to get this back up. By the way, y'all don't know what this is. It's a remote clicker. So if you ever present and you want to have your slides up and still have a clicker, this is how you do it. It's called slidesclicker.com. All right. Stay in community. Stay in community. Surround yourself with others, whether it's at your firm, whether it is friends. Be sure to stay in community and support each other. So that's it for today. We do have just a few minutes of Q&A, but I did want to share because Corey was actually in our last discovery program. For those of you who would like to explore a little bit more, Discovery is a 3-week program and it's kind of do at your own pace, but then we have a pop-up party. It's normally $297, but if you use the code belonging, you can sign up for free. That's just good through Friday though. So if you're watching the replay and you're like, what? It's just for those who showed up and stayed and played. So if you want to come join us, by the way, you'll have your video on, you might get uncomfortable, but it's a great, great community. Sean is in there. So feel free to come play with us. All right. Thank you guys so much. I think we have like 2 to 3 minutes for questions. By the way, yes, absolutely. Justin, will you, since I went through that slide pretty quick, if you'll drop that link, it's simplecourage.com/discovery, and the coupon code I think is belonging. Anyone have any questions before we wrap up and leave? It doesn't look like it. Thank you guys so much for showing up and for being brave. I really appreciate you. It's always fun to, oh, Corey's got a question. Advice for people early in their career, just in general or related to simple courage? related to Simple Courage? Okay, perfect. Find a mentor who you think acts with Simple Courage. So if you see someone, and they could just be a few years older than you, they could be, a senior associate, or they could be a partner, whatever they are, if they are showing up in a way that really looks like they are aligned with their values, and you might think that they're fearless. My guess is they've got Simple Courage. If they're showing up in ways that you aspire to be like, but you're not sure that you can do it right now in your career because you're like, what if I get fired? What if I'm not accepted? Those can be valid fears, right? And there can be repercussions. I highly encourage you to find a mentor such that when those issues come up, you can have frank conversations with them, because my guess is they're going to help guide you and coach and mentor you in a way that allows you to be strategic with your career while also being true to yourself. All right, that's it, guys. Corey, thank you so much for inviting me to come share. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you so much. You have been incredible. I really hope everybody who participated signs up for Discovery and spends the time doing the extra work. I have a saying that I've been saying more and more recently, and it came to me when I was just reflecting on some things. The work is you. The work is you. The work starts with you. And regardless of what the work is, authenticity, how we want to engage with other people, disrupting bias, the work always starts with us. So I hope you will invest in doing this self-work that can make a huge difference in how you approach life. And Heather, thank you for your generosity. I mean, when the Belonging Project gets speakers that garner top keynote rates, we know that we're blessed. So thank you for giving up your time. And Justin, thanks for making sure everything flowed well. Same to you, Mike and Whitney, thank you. And this is it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. And thank you, Corey.
Thanks.